Thanks so much, folks, for attending today. I'm so excited to see such a big group. For those of you who don't know, my name is Emily Sherrio. I'm a data strategist in residence at Amplify Partners and one of the volunteer admins here at Locally Optimistic. I'm really excited to be the host of today's panel, where we have three really wonderful panelists who are with us. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you are not speaking, please try to stay on mute. If you post a question in Slack, I will ask you to come off mute to verbalize it yourself. That way it's not just that Emily asking a bunch of questions. So we're going to be using the Slack channel for conversation and discussion instead of the Zoom chat. I just dropped the name of the channel into the chat. Meetup Staff Plus IC Careers is the Slack channel we'll be using today. Feel free to drop resources, questions, commentary, your favorite emoji. The spicier, the better. That's the way we like to keep these things nice and fun here. With that, let's go ahead and jump right in. So I'd love to get started with a little bit of an introduction of our panelists. So we have three wonderful panelists today. Harlan Harris of Algolia, Paige Berry of Netlify, and Terry Joyce of Trove Recommerce. And they'll talk a little bit about their own careers, but I'm going to turn it over to them to actually introduce themselves. Harlan, do you want to start with a couple sentence intro on you, what role you're currently in, and maybe what the weather's like where you are?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Harlan. I currently am principal data scientist at Algolia, which is a search as a service company that sells search engines to other tech companies. Let's see. Yeah, I'm in New York. It's pretty warm here, but I have colleagues in the UK and Paris who are basically melted puddles on the floor this week. So feeling empathy for them.
Yeah, my AC broke over the weekend, so a lot of empathy to people who are dealing with weather woes this week. Paige, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Berry. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a staff data analyst at Netlify. And I'm based in Portland, Oregon, USA. The weather is actually really beautiful right now, clear skies, which can be rare, lots of sunshine. So I'm loving the warmth, but I definitely have a lot of empathy for people who are not enjoying it because it's too hot for them right now.
Great. And Terry, wrap us up, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Joyce. I'm a staff analytics engineer at Trove Recommerce, which is based near San Francisco, where we get natural air conditioning all summer long. And I would complain about the cold, but I am not going to do that because I'm keenly aware. Watching the Tour de France this week and last, I'm keenly aware how hot it is in Europe and much of the US. So I'll take it. I live in San Francisco itself, near the park.
Thanks, folks, and thanks for volunteering to be part of our panel today. We are going to be talking a little bit about staff plus level individual contributor careers. So just to level set with our audience, we have done a couple of panels around this topic lately. We talked about management careers not too long ago. We talked about consultancy careers, and we'll have more on IC consultancy careers next month. We talked about thinking about career pendulums, so going from management into IC and back. And today, our panelists are going to talk about what it's like to decide to move up the individual contributor route So for most organizations, every company does things a little bit different, but a staff level role is the equivalent of a manager. So just a technical and more IC focused role, but with the same leadership and influence as a manager. So really excited to jump into questions. I will open this one to the panelists, and whoever wants to jump in here can jump in. But maybe the start is, did you ever think about management, or was being a technical IC just a clear path for you?
I'm going to jump on that one because I never thought about management, but management came and thought about me. And I became a manager, in fact, senior engineering management roles. I started my career as a programmer for the best reason, to support my rock band. And the rock band didn't last, but the programming did. So for many years, I was an individual contributor and maybe the equivalent of a staff engineer, as we know the term today, because I led small teams. I contracted for most of that time and had a small contracting business where I would take on subcontractors who naturally I had to mentor and manage. But in the dot-com years, management came calling. I had a few more gray hairs than the folks around me, and that made me the VP of engineering. And when the company grew, I found that I was head of a fairly large technical organization. I was VP of engineering at that company called Epicentric, software company, and then SVP of systems development at Telefia, which was a data company. And after that, that company was sold to Nielsen, and rather than work for a very large company like Nielsen as a manager there, I had the opportunity to ask myself what I had really enjoyed most in my career, and it was those many years of primarily programming and leading by example and coaching. So I used data as the way to do that, and worked towards what I've become now at Trove. Happy to say that I work with Caitlin Moorman at Trove, and am staff engineer there. So I found myself in more management than I really bargained for. Found I didn't like it, and reoriented my career to come back as individual contributor.
Yeah, to both give a little bit of a backstory. I'm also somebody who has done that pendulum. And I think it was unintentional at first, and I think I'm now more intentional about it. I know that the topic today is primarily about the IC side of things, but yeah, for context, so I had been an academic for a while, moved into industry as what would have become a data scientist. It was like a year before that title would have been widespread, and then basically jumped into a team management role because that was what was available, and they were interested in hiring me, and the challenge seemed really interesting. And since then, I've kind of moved back and forth and have had roles including, engineering manager for data engineering, roles like my current one, sort of principal or staff level data scientist, and sort of things in between. And yeah, I think understanding the differences between management and leadership, and trying to figure out under what circumstances whatever skills I may have are beneficial in one way or another, and what is my level of energy and level of enthusiasm for things that are more technical versus more team development, changes over time, varies over time. And yeah, I would also be curious to hear from anybody a little bit later on who maybe has really focused on not being a manager and what that experience has been like, because it isn't actually the experience I've had.
Paige, I don't think you've been a people manager, right?
That's right. I was just about to hop in and say, that's me. I what's interesting is I have thought about it quite a bit for years, but every time there's been a possible opportunity to do something like that, I've weighed all the pros and cons and really come up with the realization that I'm still feel super dedicated to growing my technical skills very much. That's where, as much as I love helping people grow, and am really empathetic and enjoy the mentoring side of what I do, when it comes right down to it, thinking about the joy I get from diving into a technical problem, learning something new, technically around what I can do, learning a new tool. Those things are still such a big draw for me that I've never quite been to the point where I felt like I would wanted to give that up. And my impression is that there isn't a lot of time for that when you are actually in a management role. Though I have heard, I've been talking with people about this for years, and one of my mentors has said that for him, what was a good way to figure out if he was ready to actually move into that role was if you realize that you would get more joy out of watching or helping someone get something done than doing it yourself. That might be an indicator that the balance might be shifting. So I keep that in mind all the time. Thanks.
As you know, Paige, I am definitely one of those people who, in my heart of hearts, was meant to be a manager. And so I like that heuristic. I think that's a good one. Okay, well, let's jump right into the hard questions. Reminder to folks, please feel free to chime in Slack with questions. But what does staff level leadership mean to you? What's the difference between being a leader as a senior analytics engineer, senior data analyst versus a staff level data analyst? What does the impact to the business look like? But more importantly, what's the personal impact, and how does it change how you think about your role? No hard questions here.
I'm trying to avoid being the first one to hit the Jeopardy button each time, but I know I'd be terrible at Jeopardy. I'll be honest, when I first heard the term staff level, and it was actually applied to me after our company went through a series of really very meticulous career leveling exercises and assigned levels as an outcome to that. And when I first heard I was a staff analytics engineer, the term staff by itself to me was not evocative of anything. Staff just means everybody who's not a user or a partner is staff. That's that's the way my head worked. So I was quite clueless about the way this term has evolved. And I'm happy to say since our company had put a lot of work into defining those levels, there was a really fleshed out description of what a staff engineer was, and it was senior to most of the levels with only principal above that, something I can still aspire to, but it spells out that the staff engineer is really expected to be highly collaborative both in the group and in the overall organization, which I felt I already was. So that was, I guess, recognized in assigning me to that level. So now I'm kind of fond of the term.
Yeah, at my previous employer, I spent a lot of time on leveling of software engineers, and I did help with the sort of data role descriptions. And we talked a lot about kind of where is your impact, and sort of at the junior level, your impact is on a sort of a well-defined component of a project. On a senior level, you're sort of kind of interpreting maybe vague requirements, but your impact is really building a thing, doing an analysis. And at the staff level, I think it just becomes a little bit more opportunistic. Like, what is the opportunity for me to have the biggest impact right now, to have the highest leverage for the company or the organization? And sometimes that's writing code or doing a statistical model. Sometimes that's putting on a product hat and thinking really empathetically about users. Sometimes it's hanging out with executives and helping them understand something, or writing. It can be very, very varied. But Terry, I very much agree with you. It's like, how can you sort of releases the top of the team, as I think where the largest impact you can have is.
Awesome. And I'd love to add on to that. I think that's a good direction to go, thinking about highest impact kinds of work, and opportunistic is a great word for it. I think for me, I think of it as doing a sort of a broader version of connecting the dots, thinking like holistically, systems wide, paying attention to what's going on in the whole org, and seeing if there are places that you can leverage your knowledge and expertise and what you know about the data to impact decisions at a higher level, where the decisions are being made. And I also think about like ownership in terms of like creating things that outlast you, if that's procedures, systems, models, just thinking about when you're fixing a problem, when you're creating a solution, you're creating it for the long term, like fix this thing, fix it forever kind of ideas in some ways.
If I can pull that thread a little bit, Harlan, you recently wrote about, reflected to a book on the staff plus role, staff data scientist, right? And I read your blog post. Thank you so much for writing it. I really enjoyed it. You talked a little bit about staff plus data scientists and their interactions with management. And I'm wondering how you think about that now. Like, what is the relationship between that senior technical member of the team and the team manager?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think it can depend a little bit on whether, we're talking about like your own manager, my manager, versus other managers that I work with. So, very commonly in product organizations, there's sort of a matrixed approach where I'm working with a wide variety of people. There was also something I think related, Emily, to that tweet that you posted this morning. Somebody was referred to that, which I haven't read it yet, but somebody referred to that and commented about how important it is at the staff level that your manager understand what it is that you actually do and what value that you bring. And I think it can be very clear at, say, the senior level of what value you bring. You're a very competent person who has worked on projects like this before and can bring a lot of expertise. I think at the staff level, as Paige was saying, being opportunistic, looking for opportunities to volunteer to work on a problem, whether it's organizational or process or technical, requires having a supervisor who understands that, is enthusiastic about that, and as a manager can support, resourcing and communications patterns to help you be successful. In terms of like working with other managers, I think it's just a very personal, what do people need? What are they like working with? And I think that just, as you get broader view and broader responsibilities, there's just more people to keep track of and more people to build good relationships with.
Outside of the context of the business, when you think about your own professional growth and where you want to focus, how you think about what leveling up looks like to you, how do you think about balancing the people and the process side of things with the technical, as there's still emphasis, or there's such an emphasis on technical mastery in each of your roles? Maybe to go in a slightly different order here, Paige, do you want to tackle us first, and then we'll go Harlan and then Terry?
Sure, that sounds great. For me, I think when I think about tackling the technical side of the role and the people and process side of the role, I often think about how I feel I put a lot of weight for myself on being on my technical skills and being able to just to show that I have them. And I think certainly that has a lot to do with being a woman in the industry, just a woman in tech. Often there can be sometimes there's like more of a barrier to prove that, yes, I have the technical chops to understand the complexity of what's going on here. And so that's really important to me. And I think one of the reasons I have focused on that for so long, making sure that that my skills are growing, that I'm paying attention to what's going on in the industry, if there are new ways of doing things, if there are advances in how we think about things like even, modeling data in the database, et cetera. Those are things I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to and I'm continuing to be strong in, because I think that there are times when that is important for me to display that I have that capability in order for my opinions to be respected. So that's part of it for me, is I definitely balance the two, because I feel like I do have a lot of experience with the other skills, the leadership skills, the people skills, process skills. So making sure that I'm keeping both of those skills growing at the same rate helps me in the long run.
Harlan, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah. That's really interesting, Paige. I think I maybe come at a slightly different cycle of my own career, where I sort of maybe overshot on the technical side. I have like a PhD and worked on very technical stuff for quite a long time. And I think one thing that I realized a number of years ago is, particularly for sort of an introverted person with like engineer brain, as we think about solving problems, like all problems have both a technical side and a like organizational coordination side. And it became more appealing for me to work on the leadership, coordination, project process management sorts of things if I just think of all of that as what is the problem we're trying to solve. And so for me, I'm very, very motivated by what are organizational goals, and trying to figure out, okay, given these organizational goals and given that I'm like, reasonably good at some stuff and reasonably not so good at other stuff, what is the thing that I can do that I can be most helpful at? And most of the time that doesn't really involve learning new technical things, although Paige, thank you for like talking about being aware of the context, the like, industry context of what you're working in as being so important and key. But I'm rarely sitting down with, a statistical paper, like learning a new thing. It's not usually that relevant. That said, every once in a while I'll do that. And it is really fun to do that in the situation where that's the highest impact thing that I can do, but it's no longer the motivating factor for me personally.
I find the balance is quite organic and also volatile, and it presents itself primarily in two ways. The technical side presents itself as the backlog of things to do, where my skill set is the best choice to do those things, and the backlog just grows. And the people side presents itself as knocks on the door in the form of it is kind of a knocking noise that Slack makes, that we all kind of jump when we hear, and meetings on my calendar. And the balance, while it moves between those two things, I think Harlan mentioned individual contributor brain, and that tendency to want to build and finish something. That leaves a kind of impatience in me that I'm not getting enough done on that front. But that's a great driver, and causes me to reorient. I do a lot of time. There's a technical task, there's people and process, and then there's organizing all of that. And I spend a lot of time, I view it as kind of a technical task, organizing so that ideally always working on the most important thing or answering the most important question, entering the most important meeting.
Thanks for that, folks. Switching gears here a little bit, we've talked about these staff level roles kind of in the abstract. I want to put them in the context of data work a little bit more specifically. And so one thing that happens as a data organization grows is people develop domain specificity. So maybe you're not like a generalist who works across the whole data org or the whole company anymore, but you're focused on sales or product or hardware, whatever your specialty might be. How important do you think that domain specificity is as you think about moving into a staff level role? Or do you find that these more senior staff and principal roles are a little bit more architecturally ambiguous and don't necessarily have that same domain specificity? Let's start with Harlan here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, yes. So I think there's just maybe different types of specificity. Like in data, I'm very, very generalist. I've worked across insights, data science, statistics, machine learning, data engineering. But I have more kind of a set of expertise around like tech sector, product development, things like that. I worked in things like search that are more application specific. And I think that's where having that context, that business context to have seen what are the classes of problems is really helpful. I think there are other tracks within the sort of staff, engineer, staff, data person, way of filling that role that you can do that are more technically specific. So shout out to Will Larson, who talked about this in the context of software engineering. There's, often some people are really focused on like, I'm going to be the very best, name your thing, understand the database better than like literally everybody else at Google. But I personally am more drawn to the, I'm going to learn about a problem in a domain and spend a lot of time talking with product people and then figuring out what is the right tool to use.
Paige or Terry, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I've worked in both a role where I was kind of more broad across the business units, doing data work for a wide range of like business problems and stakeholders, and also in a role where I was more narrowly working just with like product folks. And so I think that there are pros and cons to both of those. There are ways to have impact that they're different but similar. For me personally, I enjoy the exposure to a lot of different concepts across the business. When I'm working with different business units, I feel like I can get a wide picture, more holistic picture of what's going on, what people are caring about, and find really cool overlaps or ways to connect people of like, oh, you are working on this over here in support operations, but hey, over here in engineering, they're doing this. And actually, I think you should talk. That can be cool. And then there's something really wonderful about being able to dive deep in a subject matter area like product and really understand like all of the layers of what folks are thinking about in product and how data from like user engagement data to like retention and other things like that, how all of that can maybe start to fit together in this one area and really start to understand what product managers are thinking about and the problems they're trying to solve in a deeper way, and even maybe be more proactive on solving their problems, because I can get really down into it because like I think about what they're thinking about at the same time often. So there's pros and cons to both.
I'll add that I think it depends a lot on the organization that you work for and the size and maturity of that organization and its data capability. Because in a small organization, you will necessarily need to be very broad in both your reach with people and influence on architectures, et cetera, with product development, and also with your skill set. If you work for a larger company, it may be necessary to be much more in a swim lane or two. And that can be a blessing and a curse. I certainly have enjoyed the fact that my role is specific enough that it's not unfocused as to the technologies that I work with, and yet it's broad enough that I'm bringing in new tools all the time and expanding my skill set in a way that I both enjoy and consider valuable to my career.
Like all good questions, the answer is always, well, it depends. Focusing on each of you all for a little bit, very rarely do you see an actual job posting that's calling for a staff data analyst or a staff data engineer or a staff data scientist. Speaking from your own experience, how did you land in these roles? Like, did you have to come in at another level and were you promoted internally? Terry talked a little bit about the internal leveling exercise that he did in his current role. But if there's anything you want to add there. And then the other question, if you were looking for a new role, how would you think about moving into a new company at that staff level, or would you expect to come in and then be promoted up? So maybe let's do Terry, then Paige, then Harlan. This is like really personal, so there is no right answer here. I think what would be useful is just to share your own experiences.
Well, I have some advice that may be a little hard to take, which is that if you want to get to a certain spot, you may have to be humble and you may have to take a position in a new organization that doesn't come with the title that you once had. Certainly I'm an extreme example of that. I'm no longer looking for an SVP position in engineering, leaving that for someone else to do. And so you should be willing to choose the organization you want, the technical playing field that you want to be in, and be a little humble. Come in, maybe take a bit of a pay cut. I know it's a hard lesson, but don't worry. I'm pretty sure this inflation is only temporary. No, never mind on that. But because you will grow back into the position that you want with confidence in yourself and in the skills that you'll learn in that new position.
For me, my experience was that I got the staff data analyst title when I moved to Netlify. So prior to that, my title was senior data analyst. And I think that in a lot of ways that happened because of the amount of experience and the kind of influence I had and the sorts of projects I was delivering on at my previous workplace, and how I was able to maybe display all that in the interviewing process. So that's how that worked for me. I'm really grateful for that opportunity. It's really fun. In terms of, going at, the second half of the question. Yeah, I think that there are situations, if you're looking to join an organization that doesn't have that role, or that role is not what's being advertised or offered, then it could be one of those opportunities where it's good to maybe have questions during the interview process of like, what would be the situation for like a future opportunity to move into that role, and then with the mindset of, if you're going to join at a different title, thinking about right away how you can find and start to really like engage in those opportunities that have that wider influence, that have that like larger impact to make a case at the next, say, cycle where titles are discussed about, hey, I've been operating at this level. That's some of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I would add also most organizations these days probably don't have very clear ladders for data people. They probably spend all their time on software engineering and whatever. And so it can definitely be a managing up opportunity to be like, hey, I noticed we don't have a level for staff data analyst or whatever the role is. Can I help write that job description? And oh yeah, I might be interested in that as well. So my two most recent roles are pretty different. So currently, I filled a job listing that was specifically written principal data scientist. And I'm not sure I would have, if I was the manager, I'm not sure I would have hired specifically for that. But I think it was important. I think what they were trying to do is like, hey, we have this new growth team. It needs some like senior people who have been around the block a few times to really, make sure we're on a great track. And so hiring somebody who has a fair amount of gray hair makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what they went for. Yeah, data scientists in particular, is I'm not entirely sure if that's the thing that they was the highest priority. My previous role, I did the pendulum backwards. So I was hired as an engineering manager. I managed the data engineering, data science, and then later the search team, and kind of decided that at a particular point in time, my highest impact, most rewarding personally and for the company opportunity would be to move back into an IC role, devoting about half my time to search and partnering with the PM and eng manager of the search team, and then half time on just sort of other types of data science-y projects. And that was very much a discussion with my supervisor and other stakeholders to make that happen. And I think it worked out well, and that I was able to make some good impact. I was able to help shape the search team in particular, of having an organizational structure and a process that I thought was like a well-organized team with a good culture. And I think that's an example of where management and leadership can be separated, so that the leadership of creating an environment for search to be a very data-driven team with a good mix of people did not require me being the manager of the team, and actually was better suited by somebody else being that manager.
No, I love that. I think what that shows is like everyone's path was a little different. I have a friend that I've spoken to about this who say very similar things. They were at principal roles in their last jobs, and when they're on the market, they just know they're going to step into that senior role, come in, do the work, and then move into that staff or principal level role over time in their next company. Because there's also harping it back to what we talked about earlier, context is so important. And if you are just joining a company, you don't always have that context needed to really be effective in that staff level way. All right.
That's a really good point. So part of the I pivoted, or in this most recent role transition, I went from being a customer of the company I now work for to working at that company. And that provided a bunch of context. I think I would be very lost if I didn't have that to be successful at this job.
Good call out. So what are your thoughts for people who are looking at their careers? They're in senior roles now, they have been for a couple of years. They're looking to make the next steps. Maybe they're at a company that doesn't have that career ladder. Harlan, you mentioned a little bit about approaching your manager and saying, let's talk about what that next step looks like. How should they go about it? How should they be able to, obviously they should take the YouTube recording from this session and send it to their manager as a first step. But then what should they do?
Yeah, I mean, a good piece of advice just in general that I've heard is put yourself in your manager's shoes, figure out what they are struggling with, what they can't do, what they don't have capacity to do, and offer to do that. And so one of the things, depending on what their actual role is, and it may be actually not your manager, but somebody else, is be like, hey, I think the organization could, like I said, maybe a little bit before, the organization would get some value of having a person in this role. Can I help you write a job description? Can I help you make a case for budget? Can I talk about what some specific projects might look like where this person could be successful? And I think the expectation at the staff level is that you're setting a lot of your own agenda. And so this is kind of an example of setting your own agenda and understanding the context to set priorities appropriately.
Paige, Terry, anything you'd like to add there?
I definitely second what Harlan was saying. That's one of those opportunities where you're doing the work as you're trying to make the case that you can do the work, which is really cool. I also think that, I think Harlan, you mentioned earlier also about if there isn't a career ladder for data, or there is one, but that role isn't on there, it can be really great to get examples from colleagues, or if you can find some good ones online of, hey, this is how these companies describe this role. Then you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel if it's already out there. So that's another opportunity to learn from what other people have kind of done before.
I will drop this in the chat, but Caitlin Mormon, another locally optimistic admin, has written a really phenomenal blog post series on data career ladders that includes some examples. I'll drop this in the channel for anyone who's interested, but I cut you off, Harlan.
That's all right. What you said was more valuable. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I'm a direct beneficiary of I think of Caitlin's definitions and of having a really good example in the company that I'm in. So just violent agreement with my fellow panelists here in being ready to educate your organization if necessary, if you found yourself in, definitely companies, their data organizations are maturing, and they probably, as you pointed out earlier, Emily, have a lot more in place for the engineering side and are now trying to understand that data side. And that would be one place to look, would be at the engineering tiers, at least if those are adequately developed, because more and more we see the data side as being an engineering discipline that looks to be very precise and code driven. So those levels might apply.
Yeah, and particularly at the staff level, the sort of standard staff software engineer job descriptions are really about as much about the soft skills as anything else. They kind of assume that you can do the technical work, and the sort of staff bit is all the things we've been talking about. Actually, I think I remembered what I was going to say, which is one of the things about being a data person at a company is that not everybody knows what you can do. And part of being successful in the role is educating people outside who don't understand what a data analyst, scientist, or engineer does is, hey, have you thought about what we could do if the following thing was existed? And this is kind of an example of that as well.
That's great. We're coming up on the end here, and everyone who knows me knows I love to end meetings on time. So I'm hoping that we can do a quick round robin of final advice, words of wisdom, final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with. Let's do the same order we did intros in. So Terry, Paige, Harlan. Terry, not to put you on the spot, but putting you on the spot, take us away.
Well, if I call it sage advice, I'm going to be contradicting my message, which is to stay humble. I think that you can make your career what you want to make it. And at times that's going to involve steps down, steps sideways, and also being very willing and ready to learn from people who have something to contribute that you don't know about yet. So keep that in mind in everything you do. I think it's greatly underrated in our achievement-oriented society.
Awesome. Yes, totally agree with that. I also think that for me, some of the things that have helped me most in my career and in the role I'm in is a combination of empathy and curiosity. Being empathetic, really like understanding why people are making the decisions they're making, what they're weighing, the trade-offs they're weighing, because in understanding business context, like business, when you get all the way to the bottom, it's people, it's all people. So having empathy for people and why they're doing what they're doing helps, and being curious is also something that has really helped me a ton.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to add to both of those very, very sage bits of advice. Um, yeah, I just to echo maybe kind of along this pendulum thing, different types of roles come with different types of stress. Um, and uh, people have different appetites for different types of stress at different points of their lives, different situations outside of work. And I find that the staff IC role, while stressful in its own ways, it has a different kind of stress than the management role, while also having the impact. And if that's appealing, then I think it can be a really great trajectory. Not to dissuade anybody from going into management, it also is incredibly rewarding and motivating and impactful, and allows you to learn from all sorts of people, and is also great. But yeah, just think about kind of what would meet your personal needs as a human being, I think. And also just one other note, and this was something that I brought up a lot when I was working on software engineering ladders, is senior is a perfectly good job to have for the rest of your life. And I think that's, if what you are motivated is doing good work, working with good people, and not having to worry much past 5:30 every day, then there's no need to work. There's no need to become a staff data anything if you don't want to. You can have a huge impact and a great career without it.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I think one of the things that I'm really walking away with as a takeaway today is that careers are not a straight line. They are a squiggly, squirrely mess. It goes in a lot of different directions. And I think we keep hearing that in all of our career-related panels. So thank you again to our panelists. Ooh, thank you to our audience for spending an hour with us today, this Wednesday. We will throw this recording up on YouTube and share it in Slack. The Slack channel will be open, so feel free to keep the conversation going there. And then we also have a careers channel that we can move the discussion to once we archive. Thanks again, folks, for attending. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Emily. This was awesome. Thanks, everyone.